Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Before we dive right in, I'd first like to give an acknowledgement of country by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today. I'm meeting from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, but I welcome all participants from the many Indigenous nations across our country. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Indigenous Australians joining us here today. So my name is Annika Reynolds. I'm a fourth year law international security studies student at the ANU, and I'm also the founder of GreenLaw. GreenLaw is a law reform and social justice project that currently operates out of the ANU, and it's one that is involved in environmental justice advocacy. Our work has been our research has been published in peer-reviewed journals, been the subject of interviews in The Guardian, and has been presented at Parliament. So it's a very exciting initiative out of ANU, but today I'm here to be the moderator. And before we dive right in, I'd love to pass on to our alumni to give an introduction to themselves so that we can get started. So Tess, would you like to take it away?
My name's Tess Kelly. So I studied arts law at ANU, graduated in 2016. And then I moved up to Darwin to work as the Associate to Justice Hollie in the NT Supreme Court. And so I've been in the Northern Territory ever since then. After finishing up at the court, I went to work at Dilba, which is an Aboriginal community-controlled health service in Darwin. And my focus of my work there has been on sort of youth justice, child protection, law and policy reform. And last year I was seconded to NT Legal Aid to work on a class action against the Northern Territory government about the ongoing conditions at Dondale. So a lot of my work is kind of focused on that sort of intersection between health, the law, and policy reform. And yeah, that's the space I'm really interested in. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, Tess. Hollie, do you want to follow on from that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Annika. So my name's Hollie Kerwin. I actually graduated from ANU in 2010, so a little while ago now. Like Tess, I did arts law and I did honours in law. I'm the Deputy Managing Lawyer of the Economic and Social Rights Program at Victoria Legal Aid. That's what I do at the moment. We're very busy as a result of COVID because a lot of our work is with people who are NDIS recipients or on social security, but principally at the moment we're doing a lot of work on eviction prevention during the pandemic. I think I've been asked to talk about career highlights. Just doing the work right now on eviction prevention is a bit of a career highlight for me, but I guess I've been fortunate as well to work on some sort of very impactful test case litigation over time. So litigation relating to the detention of asylum seekers, disability rights, and probably most recently robo-debt. That's probably enough about me.
Awesome, thank you, Hollie. And last but certainly not least, Dan.
Thanks, Annika. So my name's Dan Trevanion. I was studying at ANU until 2017. I was doing Bachelor of Laws, Bachelor of Arts, Indonesian Studies. It's been a couple of years since then. I moved through the public service at the Attorney General's Department, and I'm now an associate at a UK-based law firm called Clyde & Cohen in Sydney. My practice group is in construction and infrastructure, specialising in international arbitration. I guess the connecting thread through my couple of stops has been international law, really interested in international disputes and the intersection between our legal system and other legal systems out there in the world as well. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Dan. So to kickstart this Q&A session, and particularly for all of the students here today who are prospective ANU students and are interested to see what ANU can do for them, we're going to dive right back in time, a little bit further back in time for you, Hollie, and talk about our time at ANU. So Dan, I'd love to hear, why did you choose ANU, and did your experience at ANU live up to those expectations?
A vexed question. I think I remember in first year FAL class, we got asked this question and everyone came up with the most random things. Very honestly, I didn't have much of an idea of what I wanted to study coming out of year 12. I was born and raised in Canberra, so ANU is a very short leap from where I lived. I did law. I think I heard this a couple of times from other people because, you know, my teachers said that I was a bit too argumentative, so I should be a lawyer. And when you got nothing else to grab onto, you sort of pursue that. Didn't have any expectations, but what I really found at ANU was, some might say it in a bad way, but I say in a good way, big fish, small pond. It's a very small community. It's very easy to get to know people in your cohort, very multifaceted. And so that was beyond my expectations, that I would actually go from my little Canberra network, expand it to people from Sydney and all over Australia and around the world actually as well. And it really enriched my study and what I then wanted to do after study of all this international law and international commercial opportunities.
Yeah, fantastic. And to follow up, Tess, jumping to you, did you also find that the community was a big part of your experience at ANU? And more generally, how do you think your time at ANU Law has shaped your career?
Yeah, no, look, I think the community at ANU is definitely one of the things that I most enjoyed about my time at ANU. I think it's the kind of place where most people either move there with a purpose or are there with a purpose. And I think there's something really valuable about that. So you're sort of surrounded by like-minded people, particularly at the ANU Law School. And so I find myself, even, years since I've left ANU Law School, still in, regular contact with a lot of my lecturers and tutors and friends that I made through internships and through my classes. And I feel like it's sort of that strength of community that that's seen, the growth of ANU Law over the last couple of years or quite a few years. And I think that's, that was a really valuable thing. What was the second part of the question again?
How has your time at ANU Law shaped your career?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that having the opportunity to kind of delve into clinical law programs, internships, all sorts of a range of different things throughout my time at ANU Law has definitely given me an insight into, different areas of practice and helped to kind of shape the direction I've ended up in. So yeah, very valuable experience. Awesome
to hear. And two comments about the community and the impact the community has had. Hollie, what was the most important experience or opportunity you had at ANU that shaped you as a person? Perhaps not the community itself, but any of the particular programs that ANU offers?
That's a great question. I think the thing that probably shaped me most ultimately was not like a single moment, but the real availability and enthusiasm that lecturers that I had for their subject matter and for me engaging with that subject matter. So it's a bit of a nerdy take on it, I think, but it really, I feel it carried with me even now in practice, that I assume that there will be enthusiasm for the law and for the exploration of junior solicitors, for example, exploring the law. And like Tess said too, those relationships that I made with lecturers in those days are ones that are really important to me still. Personally, I have some really important mentors in my life out of that teaching experience. But also I think there's probably a quiet confidence that you get when you've had that kind of intensive teaching and support that you can use then when you have lots of new employment experiences, which kind of come fast and thick when you're a junior solly, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the resounding thing for me.
Yeah, and Hollie, you've touched on my next question actually, which is a little bit more of a deep dive into the ANU College itself and the teaching experience that the three of you have had. And so I'm sure we'd all love to hear, what was your favourite law course at ANU and why? Tess, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I have really fond memories of a lot of courses I did at ANU. I think one that really stands out for me, because it's still directly relevant to the work I do, was taking human rights law in Australia, which at the time was taught by Simon Rice. And I studied it just after the Northern Territory intervention. So I remember clearly that the research project that I did with a couple of fellow students was a law reform submission about the need to repeal many parts of the NT intervention that were, racially discriminatory. And I think, yeah, that course for me, I took it quite early in my degree, and I think that gave me a real insight into how the law can be used as a tool to achieve social change. And I think that's something that throughout my career I've continued to learn. You know, you might not be practicing as a lawyer, but you can draw on the skills that you learn at law school, sorts of different pathways. So yeah, I think that would probably stand out as one of my favourites.
Fantastic to hear, Tess. And Dan, what was your favourite law course at ANU?
There were courses, I guess, in the non-traditional sense. I was very involved with the mooting program at ANU, some of which you could get course credit for, some of which you couldn't. I think in total, though, I managed to travel to each of the capital cities in Australia, Tokyo and Washington, through all these mooting competitions. And the benefit of that was I just got to meet people in all those different places and apply the, I guess, ANU law methodology of thinking about the law in a very practical way, which isn't to say that other universities don't have that, but ANU does have those. I feel like it's easier and more accessible at ANU to get into those opportunities. I meet students from University of Sydney or some of the other universities, and there's a competitiveness there which I wouldn't have found conducive and supportive to my development of these legal skills. But at ANU, there's really a camaraderie around it. There is opportunity if you want it. And so, yeah, in terms of non-traditional classroom courses, I found those fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you find the experience of mooting, I know that you were a participant in the Jessup moot, and that was part of how you were able to get to Washington. Was that exposure to international law the beginning of your real engagement in this space that you've now carried through?
I'd actually say it's sort of the opposite. I, in my first year, found it very difficult to engage with the law. It was only when I did the first mooting competition that I found something I liked. And it's sort of like if you imagine the parents feeding the child the broccoli, but it's covered in gravy or something like that. It was just a way for me to really find my interest in the law when it was served in a way which was something that I enjoyed. And I expect that's going to be experienced for many people. Lots of people enter the law and then move into other degrees, which is great. It's a learning experience. But I would encourage you, if you're feeling like you're struggling a bit with your interest, to find are there other ways I can, learn through my courses, because law is super adaptable. And I think we'll get to that when we go to employment opportunities. There's different ways you can learn. So it's a really great degree to persevere in.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hollie, what was your favourite law course at ANU?
Well, can I have two?
All right, I suppose.
I loved advanced admin law. It was really excellent, and the content was excellent, and that camaraderie thing. It was a small group of people who were pretty keen on nerding out. But also, I don't know if ANU still offers it, but I took the first time that ANU ran an elective specifically about law reform campaigning. And I think for me, public law and advanced admin law has always been about responsible state power and government accountability, and that intersects for me with why I do public advocacy work. So the two kind of, we're best friends, even though the setting for them was pretty different. Yeah,
who taught advanced admin law, Hollie?
Robin Craik did, and she is most excellent. And she used to bring a old school percolator to every class, so that while everybody was like really getting in on the detail, we could also have a coffee break. So there's just like such a lovely supportive context for us, really zeroing in on some of what I think are the most important Australian legal principles.
Yeah, fantastic. And we've actually had a couple of questions already in the Q&A that are talking a little bit about that next phase of, okay, well, what can we be doing at ANU now to be setting ourselves up for employability? So I'd love to hear Dan on the more corporate international side of things, and of course Hollie coming from the legal aid background. What are the 1 to 2 things that you think students can be doing now to improve their employability? Dan, if you want to go first.
Sure. I would always view it through the prism of developing your own interests and developing who you are as a person and what that narrative is going to be as you go through in your career, whatever it might be. And you'll work out really quickly what's a narrative that fits you as a person and really accentuates your strengths, and what's a narrative which is just someone else. And you can try for as much as you want to fill out the page on a CV, but it's really not going to work well for you. I can see in the chat there's a question about AI and the law and how that affects your employability. Jobs aren't getting lost at a terrific rate through AI, but jobs are being gained if you've got that interest, those skills, and you can show that you're someone who can work with some of these new innovations coming through. So that's something that you won't have necessarily coming into university, but it's something where we've got all these different lecturers with really interesting niche backgrounds and interests, research interests. It can be prompted by just having a discussion with them, and then you get launched into this whole AI law world. International law's got so many nooks and crannies. The commercial world benefits from these perspectives. So I would really encourage you to pursue it, even if you don't see the link between that and a super high paying job or a super engaging learning job, but you'll find that if you pursue it down the track.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. And Hollie, what's your perspective on what students can be doing to improve employability?
Yeah, I mean, like, I can say some practical things, but I agree with Dan. I don't think I was very deliberate at all about employability. I was just so out of it. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of getting ready for a job. But I think by the end of my law degree, I had fallen in love with the law and found what it meant to me and what I wanted to do with it. And I think, so I'm going to say some practical things, but I think that is the primary thing that you should be doing. But putting that to one side, I think if you're interested in client-facing work, like where your client is a real person, then getting experience in client-facing work. So whether that's volunteering at a community legal centre or at a community support centre, or joining a campaign as a volunteer or someone who's paid on a particular issue that you care about, so that you're in the field and you're talking to people and you're practicing communication and you're giving preliminary information about that topic. All of those things are critical for you being able to step into a job where you're working with people. I think too, exploring, just doing basic things like knowing when the times that you might need to apply for things are. Some of those things run so many years in advance now. So before I was a lawyer on the legal aid or human rights law centre side, all the other things I've done, I was a government lawyer, and before that I was an associate. And some of those things I was very lucky to be able to do because I came in quite late to that world. So knowing those things in advance is really good. And I think if you have any ability to sit on the editorial board of a journal, if you're interested in transitioning into any kind of government law or into doing research work, I think that's a great move. And then similarly, I know that the market for research assistants is somewhat compromised, I think, because of the COVID, kind of the impact of COVID, but I found it very useful in those early years to be able to have some RA work.
Yeah, absolutely, Hollie. Tons of really good tips. But one of the things that you mentioned, falling in love with the law, I'd actually love to pass on to Tess and to ask a question that has also popped up in the chat, and I think is something that you can definitely speak to here, about finding your passion within law and acting on that. How did you go about it, and how has that shaped your career?
Look, I think I've always had a sense that you know, education is a privilege, and a privilege that I wanted to use to, you know, make a difference to people who didn't have that privilege, or who didn't come from the same sort of background as me. I think that was probably something I learned at a very young age from my parents. But so I think I came into the law, I guess I didn't think a lot before I studied law about the immense power of the law to be used as a tool to achieve social change, but that's something I've come to see is really important. And so I think throughout my time at university, I just kind of threw myself into lots of different opportunities. I was involved in starting up a project heading out to Mutijulu, which is an Aboriginal community in Central Australia, and though that's not, you know, directly relevant to my law studies, for me, having those different kinds of experiences that took me out of my comfort zone and into a really new and different environment gave me a taste of a whole range of complex social issues that I was really keen to use my skills to address. Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's probably, I'd say, just putting yourself out there and getting involved in, you know, it might be legal clinical programs. I know I did one at the Aboriginal Legal Service, but it might not be. Like, it might be that you go to St Vincent de Paul night patrol, or it might be that you know, join some sort of other community initiative. And I think similar to what Hollie was saying, those kinds of opportunities, though it might not seem like it at the time, can become really important and formulative in where your legal skills take you later. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a slightly different note, Dan, I know that you had a slightly unorthodox transition from university to the professional career you are now. The professional space you're in now. I think everyone would love to hear how you went about navigating that transition from university to getting those jobs, and any tips you might have for other students who are kind of sitting at the end of their law degrees now and going, I'm not quite sure where I fit or where I want to go.
Sure. I think I wouldn't be prescriptive in my advice, but I think there are some lessons from the journey that I had. So I wasn't particularly engaged with the clerkship process. I put in a few applications. I was definitely, you know, submitting them after writing up something which I was trying to fill up a page. Didn't get any, unsurprisingly. And then that left me in a bit of a hole where I wasn't quite sure what to do. I graduated mid-year. So then I just sort of kept up my part-time job. I was working at the High Court, which was nice as a guide. I put into the Attorney General's Department, has got sort of like this little, put in for jobs, temporary register, that sort of thing. Popped onto them, then got a full-time job there. Took on a study tour to Indonesia, just sort of pursued some of these different things. And in that 6 months off or on, I sort of started to realize, my mum's Indonesian. I did my arts degree studying Indonesian. I love Indonesian people. I've done all this law stuff, litigation, disputes, mooting. What happens if I write my CV, putting those things together? And lo and behold, the first job I applied for after that, which was in Sydney here, that's the one that I got. And the whole interview was about, well, what's your interest in Indonesia? We've actually got an associated office in Indonesia. We're interested in developing that a bit more. And that opened up the door for where I am now in the commercial sector. It's really the lessons that I have there is, I didn't have a plan, but I did have a method, which was staying open, looking for opportunities, pursuing opportunities, not quite knowing what the end goal is, but just developing myself as a person. And then when the time came, I was ready for it. And that's what everyone else will be as they come out of their degrees. Stats which universities love to peddle is, how long after 6 months from graduation until you get a job, and 80% or so of students will have one by then. And that's just to say that it's tough. You won't necessarily have a job straight after university. But that process was really helpful for me to understanding what I want to do. And I wouldn't trade that 6 months for you know, a clerkship or something else, because I don't think it works in the same way.
Yeah, and building on that a little bit, we actually got a question a little while ago that actually touches on this, on that narrative of the importance of needing to work at a corporate firm and getting your clerkship and then going through the grad process in order to kind of make it in the law, or to get sufficient legal training to be able to work in the community legal space. And I'd love to throw that kind of tentative statement towards Tess or Hollie. Do you think that corporate training is strictly necessary, or are there alternative pathways for students that don't want to fit that mold? Hollie, if you want to go first.
I think there are alternative pathways. I work with people who did do that. I did not work at a corporate firm. But I did work for the Victorian Government solicitor. But I did that after having never clerked for them, and having worked kind of freelance as an RA after uni, and having had a job where I got to talk to year 11 and 12 students about what they wanted to do when they grew up. So I had a year off after uni by choice. Like, I just wanted to have a nice life. And then that, you know, and then I did the things that I did. So no, the commercial pathway is not essential. I think there's a question about whether it's useful though to do a grad year somewhere, if you can. But I would recommend it actually, if you can, knowing that everybody can't. But the skills that I had in that, the skills that I was trained with in that year still do me a lot of good today. But like in the sector that I work in, there are people who have come to community law or come to legal aid commissions having almost never worked in any other sector. So they volunteered in the beginning in a community legal centre, or for some kind of, like Tess can talk about this better than me, but you know, they're involved in some health justice partnership because they were volunteering in some allied service. And then when they finished their law degree, they started doing a bit of casual work, and then from there they transitioned into a junior lawyer job, and then maybe they move out of the community law sector and they go into a legal aid commission or something because they choose to do that. So yes, absolutely, there's another route in, and you'll also find in organisations like the ones that I've worked for most recently, there are people who've had entire other careers first. So I work with a really exceptional woman at the moment who's been an incredible policy advisor for years, and then just loves being a black letter lawyer now. But yeah, and it's just magnificent to have her on the team.
Fantastic. And Tess, can you speak to that same kind of perspective, that yes, the clerkship process is one avenue, but it's certainly not the only one?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I saw that question pop up in the chat, and it's something I know I've been asked by a lot of law students that have come and done internships up here in the Northern Territory. And I think I was the same when I was at law school. I thought, oh, you know, I need to do a clerkship, and then a clerkship will lead to a grad job, which will then give me a few years of learning to be a lawyer, and then I can be what my little brother describes as a good bloke lawyer. But then I guess I didn't end up following that pathway. I did do a clerkship, and I think they're valuable. I think it's worth applying. They are competitive, and the people they choose, you know, it's arbitrary. So I think it's worth putting your name in the hat. Equally, I think it's worthwhile getting any legal experience you can, if that's a local law firm, if that's going out, you know, to a more, you know, remote area and working for a, you know, a local solicitor. Like I know a lot of really impressive lawyers that have never stepped foot in a corporate law firm and have just been trained by someone who's really good. So I think the thing that I'd advise if you're looking to go into the law and wondering where you'll learn the most, I think the answer to that is you'll learn the most if you're working for someone who is a really good lawyer. So I did a clerkship. I moved up to the Northern Territory and worked for a judge, and the intention was always to move back to Sydney. And as is the kind of common theme in the Northern Territory, I just never did. And people thought I was crazy. Like, a lot of family friends and people that I knew thought, why would you turn down a grad job at Allen's to go and work at an Aboriginal community controlled health service? But I wouldn't regret it for a second. I think the work I've done up here is both really valuable professionally and personally, but also, I think that great organisations like the one I work for, really can make an impact. And so I guess it really depends, if your aspiration is to become a barrister, talk to a barrister, talk to people that who've done that. But if your aspiration is to work in the community legal sector, I think there are many, many ways to get there. And there's also so many different roles in community legal services and other community organisations, which can be really valuable. Like, when I was at law school, I wouldn't have known it was possible to be like what my current job is. I'm a senior policy officer in an Aboriginal health service where almost my whole role is focused on law and policy reform. And, at law school, I wouldn't have even known that existed. I would have known absolutely nothing about how to apply for it, but it was just something that came up that I got into because I was just here living in Darwin. And the Royal Commission had happened. This health service was looking for someone to do this kind of a role, and I just jumped at it. So I think that's a bit of a tangent, but the takeaway being, I think just give it a go. Like, I know so many fantastic lawyers that have started their careers as an intern and legal commission or legal centre up here in Darwin, and now they're senior lawyers that have been given jobs at big law firms later in life. So these things kind of work in funny circles, and I think just take up whatever opportunities come your way. That's my advice.
And I think a theme that has kind of emerged from our discussion so far is you've got to take the opportunities that come, follow your passion, get excited about what you're doing, as opposed to following a step-by-step process that someone else has said is the best way to do it. But I think in particular for Tess and Dan, it'd be great to, dive into the nuts and bolts of this and talk about, reflecting back on your job application processes, what advice would you give your older self, or that you give someone today who's now doing that, about some of the tips and tricks that can make that process a little bit easier or boost success rates? Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think a really key point that Tess made is that a lot of these applications are in a way arbitrary. That's not to say that the people who get them aren't great people. Often they are. But it's arbitrary because it often leaves out great people as well. So my advice is to always have clear expectations. How your application goes is not a true reflection of you, and you shouldn't mark yourself against that standard. It means that you can then approach it in a much more practical way. This application isn't about me, it's about them and the process that they've set up. And so if they're a firm which says that they like these certain things and they're very AI tech forward looking, then those are things that you should be very practical about in pursuing as parts of your CV. Doing a course related to IT and the law at ANU, participating in a moot, drafting a blog article or something like that. It's what they're looking for, and you would be naive not to be putting that front and center. And often I think that's what happens if you approach these things emotionally, that it's about you and your worth as an applicant. It's totally not. It's about what they're after. And so you should hit it like a checklist and go, okay, well then 6 months before the applications come out, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And your application will be so much stronger for it.
Okay, awesome. And Tess? I
really agree. Yeah, I really agree with what Dan just said. I think that one thing I've learned over time is that when you're reviewing applications, it's pretty easy to spot the bullshit, you know. So it's really one of those things where, like, be authentic. If you say in your cover letter that you're really interested in mergers and acquisitions, but you don't have anything to back that up, then it's going to be really obvious. And so sometimes it might be counterintuitive. Like when I was applying for the clerkship rounds, I'd never really had any corporate law experience, and you know, I didn't pretend I did, and instead I sort of angled it saying I've done all these other things in the sort of community legal space, and I know I'll benefit from the skills and learnings that I'll get in a big firm like Ellen's where I worked, and but at the same time I'll also bring other things. So I'll bring my enthusiasm, my passion for learning, my dedication. I'm really hardworking. So I think what I'm saying, that's specific to my example, but you know, talk about, you know, I talked about going out to the Central Desert and that being a really important part of who I am. And I think be authentic. These firms and things, yes, they're looking for people that are interested in corporate law, but also not really. Like, no one at law school really knows they want to be a corporate lawyer, right? So that's just my experience anyway with the process. But at the same time, yeah, I think just it's also repetition. Like, the more of these things you do, the better. So if in your early years of law school you're putting in applications for a paralegal job somewhere or an internship somewhere or whatever, you're slowly refining your ways of crafting these things, because really it is a craft. Like, an application doesn't really write itself perfectly. You have to learn how to be authentically yourself and let someone read it and know, you know, who you are, and they would just want to interview you. And then when they interview you, you'll be great. So you'll get the job. And I think that's just, yeah, that's been my experience anyway. I think it is important to work hard at uni. Like, I remember getting to college in my first year and everybody saying, P's get degrees. And I remember, like, my older brother giving me the very good advice that P's do get degrees, but they don't necessarily get you jobs straight away. That's not to say that you can't get great jobs if you don't have a great GPA. I'm not saying that, but I do think it's important, like, whilst there's so many great things going on at uni that you want to sink your teeth into, it is important to obviously prioritize your study as well, and make the most of that. You know, seek help from lecturers and tutors. Like, they're keen to help you. Go to the lectures. Like, I didn't really cotton onto this until a bit later in my law degree, but if you're at every lecture, the lecturer then knows you, and then if you're finding something really hard, you can call, like, or email them, and you can then get help. So I think that's definitely, over the years that I was there, I kind of grew up a bit and also realized that a bit more. And you find that you gain so much more from what you're learning if you are actually doing the case problem questions that you've got to do for the tut and that kind of thing. So, yeah, so those would be my pieces of advice. Like, one, you know, work hard and make the most of your studies while you're there. And then two, just try and be yourself in your applications. And yeah, and I think that can only work out well in the end.
Yeah, fantastic, Tess. And now I'm going to throw it to Hollie, because you've obviously had a few more professional experiences over the years, and there's been a bit more of a pathway. And so I'm sure we'd all love to hear is, what advice would you give to someone who is now looking at that longer term picture of not just the first grad position, but starting to set themselves up for a career path like the one that you've gone down?
Can I just check I've understood the question? Not just any career growth, but career growth into like a frontline service and test case litigation
community
type
legal
path.
Okay.
Look, there's not one path. I think that should be obvious from what we've all just said, but I think there's three kind of key ways people do it. One is that they come in on the government side and then they switch, which is what I did. And I didn't do that because I hated the government law part. It's just that there were some kind of key leading cases I was involved in, and I knew about myself after doing them that I loved the law, but also I'd like to be doing the law over here. then the second way I think is that people do that corporate firm thing, and then they get a secondment into somewhere like the Human Rights Law Centre or the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, or into a community law centre that has secondees from those major firms. And then the third way is that you come in from the ground up. So you do, there are some clerkships, they're rare, but you can do that actually put you in and pay you to learn on the job in a community legal centre. Or you just do that thing that Tess and I have both banged on about a bit already, where you just are there and you do stuff there, and then you find your way into a job. But I think maybe it's useful to share, like, I thought a lot about the switch from being a government lawyer and then moving across. And I think it's just two things. One is it's excellent when you are junior to be somewhere that will teach you how to be a good lawyer. And that doesn't determine where you end up. And I don't think you should fret about that. That's just my view, but I don't think you should fret. I think you should think, I'm learning about how to do my job well, and about what the things that this job can achieve and can't achieve, and getting a realistic and lived experience of that is really important. And then I think the next step is to think, what do I love to do? Where would I love to do it? And then to be inquisitive and curious and passionate about that, and to dabble if you need to test it out, and then and then to make the jump, and to take that enthusiasm but also those really damn good skills you got given at that solid joint you went to first across, and then employ them where you are. But I didn't have like a Stalinist plan, if that's at all useful to know. But I do remember being a government lawyer and thinking, I don't mind this for now. I really like it. I'm learning lots and I respect the people that I work with, but I know that I need to think about what next. And I talked to my mentors about things that came along, like were floating along when I looked out to sea, and talked about whether they seemed like good ideas or bad ideas. And I don't think this aspect of the law will ever go away. I had people put me in contact with people who worked in those places, and that network that you build, and you get it from ANU, like that's one of the most wonderful things about ANU, I think, means that then you've got introductions into the places that you are curious about, and then you just go be yourself in those meetings and just talk about who you are and what you're keen on and what's possible, and then people will remember you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that advice, Hollie. And I think last question before we move into the formal Q&A, and I think let's do a really quick round. What is the most exciting professional experience you have had, and why? And potentially, Dan, if you want to start us off, and maybe if your work at Tatanga was the most exciting experience, you could also knock off one of the questions that we have in the Q&A.
Sure. I mean, that probably is the answer, is that my most exciting experiences have been outside of work, and I've really tried to keep up side projects, whatever you'd like to call it. So Tatanga for me started out as a consultancy business for connecting Indonesian businesses with Australian businesses. I was at a conference and talking to someone who was doing an LLM at Uni Melbourne. He was a partner at a law firm in Indonesia. He wanted to refer a client here to set up a cafe in Melbourne. He needed some help in what the regulatory environment was here, and hadn't done any of that work before, but using the sort of method that I'd learned at ANU, very easy for me to look up the legislation and be able to provide very high level advice. Super interesting for me and super helpful for them, which started the idea. As my time commitments have sort of gone, my free time's gotten less with my job, I've transitioned that to a website which translates Indonesian articles, news into English, so they can be used for Australians to help them out. So that's been really interesting to me. It's been something to do when I'm not working. And for me, that's what makes work almost more fun, because I know that I'm fulfilling out these other interests and passions of mine. And that would include, I think, just going to these conferences. Almost every year, I think I've been to a conference. Sometimes I have to pay out of pocket. Sometimes work will help fund me. Never say no to an investment of a few $100 into just meeting a whole bunch of people in a room. It's a really engaging environment. So I'd encourage people to do that as they keep working, or even when they're in university. So many conferences at ANU that you can get in for free as some sort of, I don't know, microphone carrier or something like that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Dan. Hollie, what's been your most exciting experience?
I have no idea what my most exciting experience is. It's hard to say. I think running a Chapter 3 matter in the original jurisdiction of the High Court was pretty mind-blowing, but also terrifying. So I guess running that case, which was a test case about the detention of people brought to Australia from regional processing centres, was one of the first things I did when I went to legal aid for the first time. And it was a real consolidation for me.
Thrown in the deep end.
Yeah. Of that path, right? And it was pretty exciting to see the full bench stand up. And yeah, but I guess most recently, the day when the robo-debt litigation settled and the Commonwealth conceded, and then the whole program came to a grinding halt, I think was maybe exciting is the wrong word, but important,
very fulfilling
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tess, what about you? What's been your most exciting experience?
I think I mentioned I worked last year on a class action that NT Legal Aid ran against the Northern Territory Government about the ongoing conditions at Dondale Youth Detention Centre. And there were several parts of that work which were amazing. I loved getting to take instructions from the young people and whose stories are just mind-blowing. So very good rappers and hilarious little kids. So I absolutely loved both the client side of that and then the way that it sort of has merged into my policy reform work this year. So the class action settled, and as part of the settlement agreement in a published statement of commitments, the Northern Territory Government agreed to hand over the delivery of primary health care at Dondale to the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Service that I work for. So that means that we're now delivering that primary healthcare service, which is opened in July this year. And already, having Aboriginal staff, Aboriginal psychologists, nurses and Aboriginal health practitioners and GPs on site has made a huge difference in the health and well-being of the young people. And I think that has, for me, really highlighted how the law is a real pathway to achieving policy and systemic reforms that are just not happening. And so, I think that was a pretty incredible thing to be able to work on. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think three very, not to use the word exciting again, but exciting experiences that capture exactly how diverse the legal profession is and what a difference it can make to the lives of vulnerable people, to business, to international relations, a whole range of things that ANU really exposes you to as well. But we're now going to open up the Q&A and really dive into the questions very explicitly now. The way we're going to run this is, unless the question has specifically asked for an answer from one of our panelists, I'm just going to leave the question open for the panel to ask. So please type in any questions you may have about either our panelists' times at ANU or their professional careers afterwards. So to start off, does anyone on the panel have any advice for an introverted law student who wants to get involved, wants to make a difference, but finds being around people all the time exhausting and a very difficult thing to navigate?
I can go a little bit. First thing I would say is I totally feel you. I just found it so overwhelming when I first went to law school, and it's so nice to hear that Tess and Dan experienced this kind of really positive community. But when I started, I just saw many, many people who I didn't know were anything like me at all. And I just felt, yeah, like that was the biggest challenge. So the one thing that I know that I did that helped was that I kept going to lectures. I actually deferred for a year, because after a year I was like, this is like not my bag. But I went back, and then I went to lectures and I sat in the front and I worked out what I liked, and I talked to people about what I liked, and I didn't feel like I needed to join a multitude of clubs or fit into the groups of people who had kind of come to the College of Law with a pre-existing network or had previously been exposed to the profession because of their parents being engaged in it or siblings. And I think finding why you love learning about the law and building relationships with the lecturers who will love it if you love it is probably the thing that I found helped me find a place. And I guess absolutely. Allied to that, I would just guard against the idea that the only way to be confident and productive at law school is to be engaged in everything. I'm not sure that that would be my experience.
Yeah,
but that's
absolutely.
helpful.
And to build on that, another question that we've had come in is advice for someone who is struggling with their grades and whether or not grades matter. And I know you touched on this, Tess. So perhaps, is there anything else you want to add? Or Dan, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I touched on this before, and I think just, to start off with, I'd flag, you're not alone. Like, I remember, doing my first law assignment and having done, pretty well in high school and then getting my grade back for my, I think it was like contracts or something, assignment. I was pretty underwhelmed. And that was the pattern for the first little while. I think I flagged before that when it really crystallized for me that you need to, it sounds like a no-brainer, but I think I realized like you need to really put in the work to read the cases. Like, they've allocated those cases for a reason. And so you should read them, and you should try to work out for yourself, using the textbook, what the key points that come out of those cases are. And yeah, do read the cases, do the problem questions, do ask for help. The lecturers and the tutors really are happy to help. And that was something that I increasingly learned throughout my degree as well. But I also think there are other ways through the law school to get help if you're struggling as well. I know it can be really tricky balancing work, like if you're working and studying. I dropped back to 3 subjects, I think on 2 occasions. And I had absolutely no regrets about doing that. It meant that my degree took 6 months longer than maybe it should have, but it doesn't matter anymore that it took 6 months longer. I think it never mattered, really. So you can talk about those kinds of options. I know I spoke with the sub-dean at the law school at the time about that before I made that decision. And again, they're really approachable. The faculty really want you to do well. And if there are, personal circumstances that have come in your way to affect your grades, which they certainly did for me on a number of occasions, then it's okay to admit that. And I think Hollie flagged she took a year off. I know several people who took time out. It's an intense degree, and I think that I'd really encourage people to put their hand up and say if they're not coping, because everyone really is there to support you. And that was definitely my experience, and I have no doubt that's still the same, knowing what I know of the wonderful faculty there at ANU Law School. So yeah,
absolutely. And Dan, do you have any advice for someone whose grades, they're struggling a little bit with their grades, or they're finding it a little bit hard to connect in the law school and do the extracurriculars that they want to get involved in?
Yeah, I think just to add to Tessa's point, from my personal experience, you do have to distinguish between is the reason you're not performing your grades because of a lack of effort on your part. I think that's the first thing. Just be really real with yourself. And that's what I did as well, which was in my second year, I said to my friends, I'm not doing tutorials with you anymore, sorry. And they were like, oh, why not? You know, it just didn't work. And I had to be real and understanding that was a limitation for me. There's people who can do their tutorials with their friends and that's completely fine with them. It was really distracting for me and I didn't study properly and my grades picked up. And there'll be for others people that they'll do that and maybe their grades won't pick up and you have to look at another issue and try and resolve it. But I would always start with yourself, ask yourself, am I doing everything I can? And if the answer is yes, then look to other people to help support you. But if the answer is no, really look at yourself first and try to action that.
And moving on to another question that we've got, which I think everyone on the panel will have a slightly different perspective to bring. Do you have any suggestions on how we can start a mentor-mentee relationship with someone we respect, or how to navigate that? I think certainly for me, one of the big things that I found is having just one mentor isn't, as much as it sounds like you just have one mentor, it's actually useful to have a network of them. And it'd be great to hear your perspective on that from the panel. Hollie, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I don't think in my life I've just got one person. So I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. I think there's some really wonderful, mostly women in my life who are always happy to hear me out on something. And in terms of how do you do that, I've been a mentor through the Victorian Women Lawyers Association, and that's a formal thing. So I assume that in most jurisdictions there's a mechanism for you to have an organisation, especially if you're a woman, because it's an attempt to take affirmative action to address structural inequality in the profession, to set that up. And I think that is good. Do that. You might end up with somebody that you never gel with, but they'll actually be helpful to you in some way anyway. So that's like that's a utilitarian thing you can do. But in terms of how to just make a professional friend out of somebody that you respect, that's not, you don't need to do a special dance move to set that up. You might just say, hey, I've got this thing I've been thinking about. So dear blah, blah, you can even write it in an email. They'll get it that you're reaching out to them. I wondered if it would be possible for me to talk to you about this thing one time. I know you're really busy. I can fit in with you, but it would be lovely to talk about it. Of course, no worries if you can't. And there's nothing rude about that. That is what people want you to do, especially if you're someone who they know and that they know about you, that you're enthusiastic. And the minute you just send that little airplane out into the world, that's the first step. And then unless the person is unable to for some reason, and that's about them, not about you, then they'll just send it right back and they'll make the time. And if they're really busy, they might not get back to you straight away, and they might not set up that calendar invite in the way that you'd expect. What I would suggest that you do is just don't think that that's about you either. Just send a little follow-up after a couple of weeks and say, I wondered if you did have the time. No worries at all if you don't. And then from there, that person will know that you might come back to them for more than that one thing. But I think, yeah, just asking for help with how to think about something, whether it's what you want to do when you grow up or whether it's whether to take this job, is so important, and it gives you company in what is otherwise a very uncertain feeling journey.
Yeah, thank you for that advice, Hollie. I know that we're at 2:00 now and we're pretty much due to wrap up. But just quickly, Dan and Tess, do you have anything else you'd want to add about setting up mentor-mentee relationships?
Yes, from someone if they know you at least a little bit. So if, for example, you want to catch up with someone who is a senior lawyer, like if you're interested in, you know, working in an Aboriginal legal service or something, and you wanted to hear a bit more about what that might be like trying to set it up as like you'd like to do some volunteering, even if it's paperwork, or I don't know, like I think maybe this is just for me, but most of the mentors that I've had in my life are people who I've been working for, or who are at organisations that I've been working for, or people I've met through things I've been doing. So maybe that's like just professional mentors. But yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with Hollie's point about just reaching out and seeing, you know, if they can make time for you.
And the reaching out that I was talking about is to somebody that you know. Just to make sure. So don't send a missive out into the universe to a South African judge of the Constitutional Court or something. They just might not get back to you. But, you know, if you think that you love the living daylights out of a course and you think your teacher is just the coolest, they're going to love to get an email from you wanting to talk about it. And I totally dig what Tess said. And if you want to get connected to somebody and you don't know them, and you're not going to get connected to them through a formal thing, you just find an intermediary. So, you know, like Tess wants to know about what it's like to work in a health service, or she's interested in what's going to happen with the Dondale class action. No doubt there's somebody between Tess and the person who is going to run that, who can put them in touch, and that intermediary will be flattered to do that. So that's not a burden on the intermediary. They'll love the opportunity to put two people that they respect together to talk about something that they know those two people will love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, panelists. I know we've run a little bit over time, but I think that was because we've had just, you know, such a fantastic chat with such passion from everyone on the panel. And I think what we can all take away from it is a sense that, you know, at ANU you have the opportunity to try a lot of different things, to find your passion, to get connected, to be a part of community, and that will serve you as you go out into the professional space. And, you know, in that professional space, continuing trying things and finding your passion is really key. So thank you everyone for coming today, including all of our participants. I hope you all enjoyed it, and stay tuned for other ANU College of Law events during Open Week.